Continuing with part 2 of the floor tutorial videos, cutting off the extra bits of the lateral floor beams that poke through the fuselage. Again, I mentioned this in the previous video, but use the fuselage that doesn't have cutouts in it to cut these beams. And you'll see a definite advantage of that in a moment here, where you try and cut with components that are not. We try and cut the floor beam where the component doesn't cover the entire face of the beam. It won't let you. So off to find a fuselage that doesn't have cutouts in it, somewhere in the tree here. And make sure when you're hiding and showing things that you double click on the part that you want. Otherwise it just hides it or shows the whole thing, as opposed to the particular thing that you want. And then I'm copying and pasting that into the combined parts because I had it in a separate part before. And the same thing goes for the opposite side of the beams. But I mean, what I meant to say is they are cut automatically on the other side when you do this side, because you're cutting that component with the fuselage and it intersects in two places. And now to add the longitudinal floor beams. Same principle as the many times before, where we just draw lines as guides. Here I just have a square that I constrained to the floor panel plane so that the edges are in the correct spot. The fore and aft edges. And I'm just going to do 3 guides on, or 3 beams on each side of the plane, which is a fair number. And I'm only going to do half of them, and then reflect them over to the other side. And then projecting these onto the plane. And again, tracing lines over them instead of disassembling them, because they need to be unique components, so you could disassemble, but that again creates some update problems. And we'll create some axis systems so we can translate or transform a cross-section. We only have to do one cross-section. We can transform it to each of these locations. I'm selecting the y-axis right out of the that axis down here. And now I'm entering a sketch for the cross-section of the longitudinal floor beam. Perhaps you want to use the same cross-section as the lateral floor beam, perhaps not. Either way is fine. Here I'm just going to create a different one. It will be the same shape, but maybe different dimensions. Which is probably more realistic. And then translating those all to the different axis systems we set up. And then we swept those back, volume sweeps, same way we did the lateral floor beams. And again, cutting anything poking through the fuselage with the fuselage. This is why it's a good idea to, I mentioned in the previous video, to offset your floor panel plane within the frames, because then you don't have this stuff poking through. And it's not really poking through at this point, even after we cut it, but you can still see it because they're coincident with each other. And it doesn't know which one to show you. So the same principles can be done to create the upper level of the floor. Here I'm just adding thickness to the floor panel planes. Make sure to add the thickness down. You could also do up, but I think down is going to work better. In real life, you generally have the longitudinal floor beams showing through the floor, as in the floor panel will be split such that there's a gap where the longitudinal floor beams are, because that's generally where you have your seat tracks, where you can clip in your seats and any other things that need to be clipped in. And here I'm adding a plane to put in the riser from the first to the second level. We're just going to project the fuselage. Again, it would be a good idea to offset the projection once you get out of the sketch using a parallel curve or just an offset. That way you're not running right up to the fuselage. But once we get this out of the sketch here, I'm only going to do half and then I'll reflect it once we get out, once we fill everything in that we want. Using the magic eraser tool here to trim the lines. Having some problems with that one. So instead of getting that line there, I'm just going to make it go past the edges and then I'm going to cut it later. And I'm not even going to reflect it. I'm just going to make this whole plane, I'm going to fill it in. Again, you can't see what's on the left side there because I have a section view on. Call that the floor riser sketch, and then the floor riser panel, floor riser plane, and cut that with fuselage like I mentioned. Again, use the fuselage with no cutouts in it as a better practice. And then you can make this a thick surface. And then you can apply materials to all of these things. Maybe a carpet of some sort for the floor. And maybe you want the same principles or the same strategy for the riser can be used to put in a back wall behind the floor there, which you'll want to put in, and then maybe put a veneer on that. And there are some wood materials in the material applications tool. And then putting all this in a geometrical set called interior, or maybe you can call it accommodations, something like that. All the seats will go in with this. But that is all I have for creating the floor. And that's it.